Rachel. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you're not a different person, but you do have a different name. And this is a revisit with some of the select leaders who care we've interviewed. So how about if you just start the revisit with telling us about that accomplishment?
Well, yeah, my biggest accomplishment of 2020 by far was getting married. So Thanksgiving weekend, we tied the knot. We decided not to wait for the rest of life and the reopening of all the things to catch up with us. So we wanted to take the step forward and put a ring on this finger.
Nice. And can you give us a name?
Oh yeah, of my bride, Marissa.
Terrific. And obviously lives in New York with you?
We toggle back and forth between New York and DC, I think in part just for the variation these days, since neither one of us is going into the office. She's employed in New York. And when we started dating, I asked her, what's on the short list of places you want to live for the rest of your life? And she said the West Village. And I said, great, I love the West Village, where else? And she said, no, that's it. So we're pretty committed to a mostly New York based existence from here on out.
Awesome. Well, Marissa's, you should tell her, maybe she'll watch this, that she's a super lucky lady.
I will be sure to tell her.
I'm sure she knows that you are too. So congratulations. That's the best news for these revisits. And what I'd like to hear is, we had a great conversation the first time around, and many off recording and that we've had. What's new with you? What's new with Well and International Wellbeing Institute, and what's up for 2021?
Well, there's so much that's new at IWBI. The last time we spoke, we had just launched the Well Health Safety Rating, which was really a rating to meet the moment, to address acute health threats within the built environment, including but not limited to COVID-19. And since we last spoke, more than 800 million square feet of real estate from more than 80 countries have enrolled in that offering. And one of the things that's most exciting to us about that incredible volume of participation is that so many of the customers that are enrolling have also indicated their intention to upsize to a full WELL certification pathway, because WELL Health Safety really addresses a subset of issues that are covered in the WELL rating system. And that's an amazing indication, and I think a foretelling of this enterprise level commitment that more and more organizations are taking on in favor of supporting holistic health and well-being for their employees and for their other stakeholders.
That's awesome. You couldn't have had a better advertising. 80 countries, 800 million.
Yeah. Sounds almost too good to be true, although the number ticks up every day. So I find that it's always out of date. Since the start of the pandemic, we've been enrolling about 2 million square feet, actually more than 2 million square feet on average per day into WELL programs. And that includes that more holistic WELL certification. So it's been incredible to see how much that interest has ticked up, although perhaps not surprising when you consider the full host of issues that we're facing globally. But as a result of a lot of that demand from our customers and the diversification of that demand, we've got a bunch of new products that are in the works that we're equally excited about. So it's going to make 2021 a busy year, but a really generative one too.
Well, I tell you, some of my favorite people have been talking about it, like Lady Gaga and J-Lo and so on. Even a guy named, what's his name again? Scialla. Even a guy named Paul Scialla. That was a pretty cool.
That'll happen too. We launched our very star-studded consumer awareness campaign because we know that that's such a big part of our mission for market transformation. So that's been really exciting. Certainly when I tweet about our products and offerings, they don't get a million hits within a day, which is what happened when Michael B. Jordan and Lady Gaga and J-Lo posted on their various accounts on different platforms. So we're really, really grateful for that extra dose of support in raising the public's awareness about the importance of thinking about the health and safety attributes of our spaces for getting back to life as we knew it.
Yeah, it's it's fantastic, and yet maybe not surprising that so many have joined on, and are also now seeing that they should upgrade because they see the full benefits for it.
Yeah, that's one of the most exciting things of all, is just that these solutions, that these commitments, they don't just seem to be a reaction to the pandemic, though they might be inspired by the pandemic. And I know we talked about that the last time that we spoke, just that, what COVID-19 has taught us is that health and well-being is material to a business's bottom line. And the way that we treat our employees, the way that we treat our staff members, our customers, our guests, our visitors, has a major bearing on the health and vitality of our business going forward. Making that linkage is critical, because it means that we move out of being an altruistic commitment that's about doing the right thing, and into a place where the proposition is thoroughly integrated into considerations for the business's bottom line.
Well, so, yeah, aside from all the conversations we have with leaders at corporations about taking care of their employees and customers, we're clearly seeing a heavy leaning towards preventive right now. That's way overdue by decades. And with certain companies that have AI for preventing blindness from diabetes, from companies that are doing telemedicine now, where the future is now the present, obviously going on. So it really makes sense even more that what you're doing is protective and preventive, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And our system advocates for those preventative measures for human health, but also for preventative measures for buildings. In other words, like, that's another massive acceleration that we've seen as a result of the pandemic, this notion of taking the pulse of the building in real time, being able to have a dialogue with your building on the regular as it pertains to human health. So, instead of waiting for an indication that something's gone wrong with the air quality or the water quality, really monitoring those vitals as frequently as, every day, or for that matter, every couple of minutes.
And I know we've probably, well, I know we've talked about this before. I just don't know who was on the last video, but from some of the aspects of our work, for company A to be able to attract the top people, to be able to say that they have that, really shows, not to be cute, that they are leaders who care about their people. And that could be a decision, that could be a differentiation in a decision to join company A or company B.
Even before the pandemic, recruitment and retention were the number one motivators that we heard about from our customers in terms of their choice to pursue a WELL designation or certification. And I think that that's, to some extent, that's likely held true, although I think that there's a larger system of motivators that's come into play, in part just based on a dramatic increase of the general public, including top level decision makers and businesses, about the importance that places and spaces have on our health, on our well-being, and on our safety. And that could be because you've been stuck inside for the better part of the year. Maybe you're dealing with poor ergonomics. Maybe you have better daylight than you had at your office, and you've seen enhancements to your own productivity and happiness. Maybe it's because you're afraid to go back to work, afraid to step foot in an elevator or on public transportation. But like, in general, we've all raised that collective level of consciousness about the impact that space has on our ability to thrive or even survive.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I wanted to lean a little bit towards another direction for a second, because it's about all that, but I've also been working and engaging with you guys about the workplace environment. And it seems like every time I call you, well, not every time, but last time you also had great art behind you, and this is a different great art. But things like that impact workplace environment too. I remember at the headquarters of CBRE, they had graffiti on the wall that was purposely put there, local people. Talk a little bit about how that impacts your wellness and your well-being also in a company.
That's something that we're trying to dig into even more deeply as we focus our attention squarely on the topic of health equity, and this notion that the places where we work and where we live, where we play, where we study, can have on leveling the playing field, on making a space feel accessible and welcoming to anyone, and to giving all of us the best opportunity to live the healthiest version of our lives. I heard an amazing story from one of our co-chairs of our health equity advisory, Cheryl Durst, who is the CEO of IIDA. She said she was doing some work for a company whose core business is selling salads. And she was standing outside of one of their stores, and they were trying to increase their diversity profile of their customers. And she was standing outside, and two Black women walked by, and Cheryl asked them why they weren't stepping into this particular place to have their lunch. And they said, well, this is the place where essentially rich white ladies get their salads. And she asked them to step inside with her. I think she bought them each a salad. And then she asked them to identify what was it about that space that didn't welcome them in. And they gave a very concrete list. They said, like, well, the art just like doesn't resonate with us. It's not by local artists. The color palette isn't really a color palette that appeals to us. We were embarrassed when we didn't know how to pronounce quinoa on the menu. There was nothing to help us to understand how we were supposed to order and feel comfortable. And yet the work that we do at IWBI is about taking the evidence that points to why, for instance, you would feel welcome or unwelcome in a space, and then codifying it into interventions or into actionable and practical strategies. And doing that work is actually difficult, right? Like, how do you actually write that? How do you code that into a rating system? Is it as simple as just saying, have local artwork? We see a lot of well projects, like some amazing projects in Australia that I visited pre-pandemic, that have these larger than life installations by local indigenous artists. You know, is it about more color theory? You know, is it about more biophilia in a space? Really understanding that and understanding the evidence is one thing, and then figuring out how you actually codify it into the system. I'll give you a parallel example. We have a feature within Well that addresses portion control, because portion control has been positively linked to outcomes related to obesity and lowering obesity. And, you know, that's all well and good. And there's a huge, you know, foundation of evidence that intervention rests upon, but it doesn't mean that anybody ever told you how big the plate should be or what size the bowl should be. And that's really our art at IWBI, is taking that evidence, taking that human experience and translating it into practice.
That makes total sense, just because, like, in part of what we do with executive search, we've told people your job description's wrong for women, for diversity, you're this, you're that, you know. And if you're going to be at work so long, aside from the usual great aspects you have in what you do, like I said, the art or non-art or certain chairs or whatever, or, you know, could make people feel different and not be as happy as they should be, which affects everything else. That's fascinating to me, and
but it's subtle. Like, even in a job description, it's subtle, you know. So many things that we haven't thought about before, like when we say a master's degree is preferred, how many people do we leave out because they just say, like, well, I couldn't possibly be qualified for that position. Or in our office or in our organization, where we also have been paying a lot of attention to our recruitment practices, when we interview someone, what does it mean when we come back and say, like, that person would be a great culture fit? Is that basically like a euphemism for more of the same? And hiring people who are more like us as opposed to less like us, you know. So we're even trying to, like, get down to the nuance of the language that we use internally to talk about candidates, to try and create a more inclusive hiring practice.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to me, because there's a reason we talk about getting the right fit culture ad versus the culture fit, because even right fit on its own means you fit in exactly like they are, and that doesn't work. So onboarding has to be different, all this stuff. And it's interesting because I had a conversation with this collaboration we're doing about anti-racism, and the word best practices kept coming up. And if you're going to have systemic change, you can't bring systemic change into best practices that aren't best practices anymore.
Yep.
because it wasn't working. So they can't be the best practices anymore.
That's right. You'll have to like change their name to be like unbest practices or previously
Well,
known as best practices. But it does require like a lot of unraveling, which I think is part of why it can be scary to, especially as a leader of a business, to enter into these conversations. Because you really have to come face to face with how you've been operating and be willing to reassess a lot of it. We just did a training on one of the boards that I sit on for partnering with Indigenous communities. And my mind was blown. Like, I was like, I know nothing, about like the fact that, even talking about something like, I don't know, property ownership, when an Indigenous community says like, no one owns this land, the earth is the sole owner of all of these trees, of all of this clean air that we're just borrowing. It's just such a radically different lens to put atop of so many things that we take for granted, right down to like the name of our country. And the woman who we were working with wasn't suggesting that we had to change all of those practices, but that we had to enter into those conversations with Indigenous communities with a lot more awareness than we currently do.
Yeah, we got to get off that we know everything, and we got to just open up and listen big time. And it'll actually be better for everybody if we do. And actually, more exciting, in my opinion. You're going to add more flavor to your life. You're going to add, more performance. I can understand people are afraid of change, but when you can embrace this change, you're going to find out that it's going to taste a lot better, if you will. So that's fantastic. You guys are doing a great job, and I wish the revisit could be longer, but this gives us a chance. Like in LA, you're always looking for a sequel, so it gives us a chance to do another sequel. So thanks a lot. You're truly a married leader who cares now. And,
I sure am.
So good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you. Next time with a new piece of art in the background. Thanks for reconnecting.
Whatever it takes.